You may be familiar with that old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, that's probably partially true, but I want to tell another story to help us maybe understand why that might be the case. I've been very close with the Filipino community in Salt Lake City, Utah, and one of my favorite people is someone I'll affectionately refer to as Ate Nieves. Ate Nieves is an immigrant from the Philippines who lives in Utah, and a lot of people know who she is because she sells Filipino foods and other goods out of her basement, things that you can't find at the grocery store. So being able to go somewhere and purchase goods and foods that you can't find elsewhere is a great way to feel like home all over again. Well, Ate Nieves actually immigrated from the Philippines when she was in her 20s, and she's lived there in the United States for about 40 years. However, one of the things I noticed in speaking with her is that her English is pretty broken. She's really struggled over the last 40 years to become fluent in her English. Now, I also know people from the Philippines who have immigrated to the United States when they're maybe 15, 16 years old. And usually within 2 to 3 years, they have adopted an American accent and sound almost like they could be from America. And so I've always been very curious about why that is. Why is it that when someone moves from the Philippines to the US as a teenager, they so much more quickly adapt to the language and how it sounds and the manner of speaking than someone does when they immigrate in their 20s? I think there's probably a couple of reasons for it, and I'm no scientist, so I'm just going off of my own opinion. My guess is that when someone's 15 or 16, they're still in school. So they move to the US and they feel this intense need to assimilate. They want to fit in. And so they try really hard to look and sound like everybody else. That makes sense to me. The other thing that we know about the development of the human brain is that when someone's younger, the brain has what's called more plasticity, which means that it's easier for people to take in new knowledge and learn new skills. When someone gets older, that plasticity starts to go away, and they have to be very intentional about learning new things. Why does this matter for us? Well, one of the things that we're trying to teach in this soft skills training are new skills and principles that you might not have heard elsewhere. See, at a lot of business process outsource companies, they're heavily focused on teaching you specific phrases in order to show empathy to a customer, like, I understand, or I completely get where you're coming from, or maybe I would be frustrated if that happened to me too. The issue with those kinds of phrases is that customers know that they're not real. They sound scripted. Another word that we might use is canned. And in those situations, sometimes using those phrases can do more harm than good. So we're trying to teach you to incorporate genuine and authentic care into the way that you speak to customers in order to help you connect with them at an emotional level. So in a sense, I'm asking you to take all these, what I'll call bad habits that you might have learned from other business process outsource companies, let those go in order to learn a new way of connecting with customers that allows you to really understand them at an emotional level. Is it possible? Absolutely. It's never too late to teach that old dog new tricks. And so even if you have years of experience as a customer service representative, you can start to unlearn those bad habits and put in practice new ways of connecting with customers. I'll use my own personal experience as an example. When I was 41 years old, so 5 years ago, I started to learn Spanish. I've always wanted to learn Spanish, and I got to a point in my life where I decided I couldn't wait any longer. And so I downloaded an app called Duolingo, and I began learning Spanish grammar and words. Now, when I first started learning Spanish, I knew that it was going to be a big challenge. So I told myself that I would commit to learning Spanish for 2 years. And if at the end of 2 years it wasn't working out, then I would allow myself to quit. But I had to give it at least 2 years. So after 6 months of trying to learn Spanish, I remember going and speaking with someone at work who was fluent in Spanish. And I asked them a question, they rattled off an answer to me, and I had no idea what they were talking about. It was incredibly frustrating. And in that moment, I wanted to give up. But I remembered that I had committed to giving it 2 years. And so every single day, I kept doing my lessons in the language app. Well, 18 months after I started learning Spanish, I remember that I had an Uber driver who was from Colombia. And so I thought, hey, this could be an opportunity to practice my Spanish. I had heard that Colombians have amazing, easy to understand Spanish. And so I struck up a conversation. Now, prior to this point, I'd always been discouraged because I couldn't understand what people were saying to me when they responded to me in Spanish. But in this moment, I had a conversation with that Uber driver from Colombia, and I understood everything that he was saying, and I was able to communicate back to him in Spanish in a way that he understood what I was saying. That boosted my confidence, and it gave me the encouragement to continue with my Spanish learning practice. I've continued to hone that skill ever since, and it's benefited me on my trips to Costa Rica and other countries where Spanish is spoken because I've had the ability to communicate what I need to with the people there. Now, I recognize that I don't speak at a native level. However, I'm also not giving up. Yes, I know enough to get around and have basic conversations, but I'm going to continue to build that skill until I can speak at native proficiency. Is it too late for me to learn a new skill? Absolutely not. It doesn't matter how old we are, if we're intentional about learning a new way of doing things, we might be surprised at how well we pick it up. Similarly, in this process of learning new soft skills, setting old habits aside so that you can be open to listening and speaking in a way that really connects emotionally with your customers, I promise you that not only will you benefit in this role, but in future roles in leadership and in other roles that you might have in your career.